Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. This is a webinar around a better approach to DLP, and I'd like to introduce today's speaker, John Beeskow.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome everybody to our DLP webinar today. As Matt mentions, my name is John Beeskow, and I'm the EVP of IT and Security Strategy for CBI. I've had this role for just about 14 months, and in the Security Strategist role, I work with our customers to align their business risk and their IT risk, to review their security programs, and to talk about the effectiveness of their IT controls. Today's DLP webinar is one of those cases where the technology is just a tool, and the real value comes with how it's deployed and how our customers are using the technology to reduce the risk to their organization. As I mentioned, I joined CBI about 14 months ago. Prior to that, I had an 18-year career with a local bank, where for the last 13 years, I was their Chief Information Security Officer. I started working with and looking into DLP technology back in 2008 and finally purchased my DLP solution in 2012 after multiple proof of concepts and risk assessments. The challenge that I faced and why it took me so long to make that purchase was convincing my leadership why this technology wasn't just another tool investment. They were looking at my overall spend, and they were looking at my defense in depth strategy, and kept seeing me coming back and asking for another tool, another tool, another tool. My challenge was convincing them and showing them where this particular piece of technology fit into that overall stack. The second challenge that I had was, how are we going to manage this technology? We're going to talk a little bit later on about how we solved this problem and how we were able to deploy the technology with just one new FTE and leveraged our business units to take a lot of that responsibility. So as Matt mentioned, we will have some time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. I do hope that this is a start of a conversation. And so we're more than happy to have conversations, whether it's online today during the webinar or offline afterwards about DLP and how you're going to address this with your company. So why do DLP implementations fail? And fail is probably too strong of a word here, but too often I'm talking with customers about how their hopes and dreams for DLP just haven't aligned with reality. The way the DLP has been sold for years is to have a vendor come in, set up a quick proof of concept, and show the customer all the sensitive data that it finds. Back when I was at the bank, we did this dance twice, and sure enough, a vendor came in, they plugged their device into the environment, we configured a couple base policies, and sure enough, as expected, the tool found lots of examples of sensitive information either at rest on a file share, traversing our network, or being sent out via email. For a long time, that's all it was necessary to instill enough fear, uncertainty, and doubt to get a purchase order pushed through. The problem is, this sets up the wrong success criteria. It plants the seed in the mind of the purchaser and the executive team that DLP will stop all that sensitive information from being exposed, and that's simply not the case. DLP is not a data firewall. It certainly does have some preventative controls, but expecting a DLP solution to block or prevent 100% of your data leaving your network is just not a reasonable expectation. Unfortunately, it is what executives often think when they sign up for that DLP PO. Another thing that this leads to is pressure on the CISO and the security manager. They're expected to be Superman. How often have you heard that's security's responsibility when it comes to protecting information? Too often, we allow our users and our business leaders to transfer the responsibility of data security solely onto the shoulders of information security. When presented incorrectly, DLP can further this misconception. Announcing a DLP purchase and keeping the collection of events within the IT or security operations area only furthers this perception that security is not their responsibility. Why should I worry about data handling? Our DLP 2.0 program is all about business enablement and shifting that responsibility back to the lines of business. And we're going to talk about that some more. But before we get too far into blaming the business users, we need to recognize that IT contributes to this failure of DLP as well. As you know, DLP is traditionally viewed as having three main components: data at rest, data in motion, which includes email, web, cloud, and other network-based activities, and data in use, or data on the endpoint. Within each of these three pillars, there are two options to monitor or prevent. The software vendors would love to sell you all three aspects of this all at once and tell you how easy it is to get the whole system up in place and running. And generally speaking, it is. The technology is rather easy to deploy. Um, if you provide the system with the right credentials and point it in the right spot, it will easily set off to scan your entire set of data repositories. If you identify an open span port near an egress point in your network, the data in motion component will start to analyze all your network traffic. The problem is you've just opened up the floodgates and started to analyze your entire organization all at once. If we have an install it all mentality, it will certainly help us close out the project quickly, but it will just bury ourselves in with the responsibility of monitoring all those events. And if we avoid that pitfall, maybe we fall victim to other scoping problems. If we start with data at rest, perhaps we start to scan the entire inventory of file shares, databases, email, SharePoint repositories. So while we haven't deployed all three components all at once, we've tried to monitor the entire organization, and that too will lead to a flood of events. Lastly, it's very easy to get those policies enabled, and out of the box, these solutions come with all the right policies to hit the big sensitive topics of social security numbers, credit card numbers, intellectual property, HIPAA, et cetera, but by enabling all those default policies, the same thing's going to happen. You're just going to drown in events. Another piece that leads to this flood of events is that the company usually don't know what's critical. I think conceptually, a lot of companies know what's important to them, but faced with the challenge of having to describe in technical terms what sensitive information looks like, they really struggle. In the back of my mind, after having some of these workshops, I hear C-3PO from Star Wars when he's trying to shut down the garbage smashers. He starts saying, "Just shut it all down, shut it all down." In the same way, they start identifying, just block all the data, block it all. But the flood really is caused by having too many policies enabled at once and not taking a critical look at what's important and how to really identify and describe that information in terms that a tool can identify. So how can we do this differently? Well, first and foremost, I view DLP as a behavioral modification tool. Now, I don't mean it's a taser, well, at least not at first, but it should be used as a tool that provides insight into 1, where is my data? 2, who has access to it? And 3, how is it being handled? It's critical that all parties understand that the tool, what the tool is and how it's to be used. And it's the how is it being handled that really provides the most valuable information. Because the goal is not to block or stop all the bad things, but is to align business risk with IT risk. I think the slider at the bottom of the screen is really the most important component. We're not going to have an environment where we eliminate all risk. We've got to find that middle ground where we can enable the business to happen while at the same time managing the exposure. So first and foremost, the first thing that we often talk about is enabling or requiring the business units to participate in the first level review of DLP events. When I rolled out DLP at the bank, we identified 1 or 2 business individuals within each department to participate in the review of our DLP events. We did this because we knew that they knew the data, they knew how it was being used, and they knew the business process that ran the department. This approach will also help with concerns about full-time equivalents, or FTEs, that are needed to run and manage the tool. IT or InfoSec, their responsibilities for the platform and its configuration, but the line of business is responsible for deciding on the business rules or the policies and the review of those DLP events. I got this accomplished by getting the business units involved and getting them involved early. During the actual review of the events, we had each reviewer tag the events as either an approved business unit, or excuse me, an approved business process, a broken business process, personal use, or suspicious. And all suspicious events were escalated to level 2 within information security for review. At the end of each month, the cumulative results were presented to our data protection committee for analysis and discussion. That's really where the magic happens. This data protection committee was made up of business executives for each of our lines of business, and they were able to sit around and discuss the trends that were going on within each of their organizations. It's that peer pressure and discussion amongst each other that got them talking about how different departments had different risk exposures. Plus, you start to really dig into what approved business process means, and you start to uncover behavior that is impacting the overall risk posture of the company. This leads to conversations about how to improve business process that not only reduces risk, but also can provide real cost savings. Ultimately, I found that the most common response was, well, that's the way we've always done it. And that's a great opportunity for injecting new business process with an eye towards risk reduction in mind. As an example, one of the first departments that we got on board was our loan origination group. And this group had a business process where they printed off every loan package at the time of loan application from a customer. And they did this because for years they would print off these documents and store them in file folders within a large file room in the back of the building. And that's just the way we've always done it. When we first set up the DLP tool, we were flagging with the data on the endpoint module and with the data on the network or data in motion module every time that the sensitive information went to the printer. And this was causing a large volume of events for the department, and they were going in and flagging each time that occurred as an approved business process. As my team started talking with them about their large number of events, especially in relation to their peers, we uncovered this as being the #1 cause of their DLP events. We started talking with them about what that meant. And we talked to them about the risks that were associated with printing loan files, how those could be easily lost or stolen. From time to time, loan offices in particular will open and will close depending on the volume in a particular market. And every time a loan office closed, we had to take it and handle that printed documentation. By just simply moving them from a paper-based environment to more of an electronic environment, that department head was able to recognize a significant reduction in operational costs from toner and from paper. And at the same time, they were able to show their peers how they were reducing risk to the overall organization. It really provided them with an opportunity to both look like a hero from an operational standpoint, but also show that they understood risk management and were able to reduce the overall exposure. What really helped was putting risk into terms that they understood. Instead of just having yet another security awareness class, I was able to really put things into terms that impacted them on a day-to-day basis. The other important point there was once we've re-engineered the process, I made sure that they documented it. For companies that are heavily regulated, that have SOX control consideration, or any department that undergoes regular audit, having well-documented procedures about how sensitive information is handled and how a tool like DLP is in place to monitor that procedure will really help. All of this activity really moves the security officer into more of an advisor role, which is really where we want to get to. As I mentioned early on, CISOs and security managers feel a lot of pressure about being the sole person responsible for protecting the company. By involving the business units in a risk discussion, you really do move into more of an advisor role. The key thing to remember here is that both doing and not doing are valid business decisions. It's just that each decision have a different impact on the overall risk posture of the company. That business line could have easily come back to me and said, no, John, we're going to continue to print each of these loan files because we feel better knowing that we have the hard copy back in the file room in case the customer come in or whatever business justification that they have. That's fine, and that's a valid business reason for doing that. It's just a matter of making sure that we document that and understand that we're going to take on an additional level of risk because we're going to continue to do that. It's really the job of the CISO to describe those different levels of risk in terms of threats, likelihood, and impact. The risk to my organization from printing was high on the impact scale and medium on the likelihood access. Conversely, leveraging our existing imaging system and stopping that printing eliminated the risk by eliminating the opportunity to lose that information. This dramatically lowered the risk impact to the line of business and overall to the overall risk impact to the company. The added benefit to the business line was that they were able to take credit for that improved efficiency, the cost reduction, and the streamlined process. I was able to make them look like a hero while I was able to reach my goal of reducing risk. The second key thing when you're rolling out DLP is making sure that you are doing this in a phased approach. Not only do you have to plan the phased rollout of the different technical components of DLP, But you also need to phase in the line of business. My advice is to start with the risk-aware business units like HR, audit, finance, and legal, as these are natural starting points. These lines of business are usually fairly universal in all organizations, and they have information risk built into their DNA. They already have a base of understanding when it comes to business risk and the impact of risk to the company, and they usually have their critical information well defined and have operational procedures in place for handling that information. Just be sure to approach it with the goal of reducing risk and not eliminating risk, keeping in mind that the goal here is to bring IT and business back into alignment with the overall risk impact of the organization. I'm certain the company does not have a zero risk policy, so there will be compromises and discussions about how data is handled, used, transmitted, etc., and where opportunities to reduce risk can be gained. Too often, CISOs are viewed as the chief no officer and users are usually told, and rather harshly, always lock your workstation, never write down your passwords, only use a company-approved device. The problem with these restrictions is that the users will often try to find their own ways around them in the pressure of getting their job done. This is an opportunity to review with the business lines and partner with them to help reduce risk. That's why the real power is, as I've mentioned over and over again, is putting things back into terms that they understand. Once you're able to get them on board and supporting the process, then you can start to branch out into the other departments that may not have as much of a focus on information handling. Invite those business leaders to your next committee meeting and show them how that peer discussion can really help them understand and evaluate their own risk handling. Eventually, though, you are going to want to start to enforce and reinforce that new behavior. Simply talking about risk, changing process, and modifying behavior all sound good, but eventually you have to electrify the fence and hold people accountable. Visibility and accountability are crucial when you want to achieve long-term changes. Talking with the line of business about the process is great, and when pressed, I'm sure they will say all the right things and want to move to a more secure environment. But when that deadline is looming and business has to get done, old habits are hard to break. That's why integrating DLP with other technology or implementing the preventative controls that come with it come into play. Automatically encrypting email, blocking USB devices, and warning users when files are being stored in the wrong spot, and then reporting on those top offenders are all ways to protect the organization while reinforcing this new behavior. I recommend generating trend reports and publicizing cumulative DLP data, which will help add accountability to the process and will bring some competition to the table. Obviously, we aren't going to recommend calling out individual users, but showing different lines of business who has the most events and where the most preventative controls are being enabled is a great way to spark some of that competition. Like with all things in life, risk reduction is a journey. And you're not going to install DLP, flip the switch, and then check the checkbox that says we're secure. You're going to generate a ton of events at first, no matter if you take this phased-in approach, no matter if you have well-defined classification for your information. If you take a small approach to your business lines, you're still going to have a lot of events. But over time, you're going to see those number of events get reduced through constant reevaluation of your policies, working with the lines of business to define the proper handling of information, working to notify, and then eventually moving on to prevention. Our guidance when it comes to a successful deployment has 5 phases. First, you can't just focus on technology. You need to align the success of the project with the overall risk reduction and the alignment of IT risk with business risk. 2, you need to take a phased-in approach to the technology. Identify the risk-aware business units and start with them. 3, make sure that IT is responsible for maintaining the platform and its configuration, but the line of business should be responsible for deciding on the business rules or policies and the resolution of the data loss prevention events. 4, engage with the business units to define the business process, especially those that involve the handling of sensitive information, and then eventually look to electrify the fence and put in those preventative controls. And then lastly, create management reports that aggregate the events from all the departments into a single dashboard. Create a discussion environment where the lines of business can have a discussion amongst themselves about risk and reducing their overall risk posture to the organization. And really, that's all we wanted to cover today. It was meant to be an introduction to our DLP 2.0 approach and really start a conversation about how to engage your lines of business into DLP technology.